June 28, 1944, 13:42 hours outside Cherbourg, France. Panzer IV commander had exactly 4 seconds from the moment the scream of diving aircraft tore through the sky to the instant 134 pounds of high-velocity rockets turned his 25-ton tank into a funeral pyre. The weapon that reshaped armored warfare in Europe wasn't fired from another tank. It came from above, dropping at nearly 200 feet per second, what German tankers grimly called Der Himmelshammer, the Celestial Hammer. Americans had a different name, the High-Velocity Aircraft Rocket, and by the summer of 1944 it had transformed the P-47 Thunderbolt from a fighter plane into the most feared tank killer on the Western Front. The shift in aerial warfare against armored targets didn't begin with grand strategy. It began with desperation in the hedgerows of Normandy. On June 12, 1944, just 6 days after D-Day, Allied ground forces encountered what intelligence had disastrously underestimated: German armored reserves hidden in unprecedented density throughout the Bocage country. The 12th SS Panzer Division alone had 150 tanks positioned within striking distance of the invasion beaches. Traditional ground attack aircraft carried 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs, weapons designed for broad area targets. Against single tanks, they were painfully inefficient. A fighter-bomber pilot had maybe 3 seconds over the target. Bomb release demanded perfect altitude, speed, and angle, missed the mark by 30 feet, and the tank survived while the pilot flew straight through deadly flak on his way out. The numbers were unforgiving. 8th Air Force records from early June 1944 show fighter bombers flew 847 sorties against German armor in the first week after D-Day. Confirmed tank kills, 23, a success rate of just 2.7%, with 14 aircraft lost to ground fire. At that rate, the Luftwaffe didn't need to challenge air superiority. German flak crews were doing the job on their own. The solution had existed since late 1943, but production delays and doctrinal resistance kept it from reaching frontline units. The HVAR, high-velocity aircraft rocket, was a complete reinvention of air-to-ground warfare. Unlike gravity-dropped bombs that required perfect timing, rockets could be aimed like bullets and fired from beyond effective flak range. Technical specifications from Army Air Forces proving ground command reports at Eglin Field revealed just how revolutionary the weapon was. Each HVAR measured 68 inches long with a 5-inch diameter. Its warhead carried 45 pounds of Composition B explosive with a shaped charge engineered specifically for punching through armor. The solid-fuel rocket motor could push the weapon to 850 feet per second within just 2 seconds of ignition. But the true breakthrough wasn't speed, it was the ballistic profile. Traditional bombs dropped in long, predictable arcs, ruled by gravity and release velocity. The HVAR flew almost flat out to 1,000 yards, giving pilots a point-and-shoot capability no one had ever seen in air-to-ground combat. P-47 Thunderbolts could carry 8 HVARs, 4 under each wing, turning a single fighter bomber into the aerial equivalent of a destroyer's broadside. The German armored forces in Normandy were the finest mechanized units the Wehrmacht could field in the summer of 1944. The Panzer Lehr Division near Saint-Lô alone had 183 tanks and assault guns, all crewed by hardened veterans of the Eastern Front. These were men who had fought Soviet armor, American Shermans, and British Churchills. They knew how to turn the Bocage into a fortress. Normandy's ancient hedgerows offered perfect defensive positions, so perfect that one tank could dominate an entire stretch of road. Oberst Colonel Friedrich von Hausser, commanding Panzer Regiment 6, wrote in his tactical assessment dated June 10, 1944, "The Bocage provides ideal defensive terrain for armored operations. American fighter bombers pose minimal threat when our forces remain dispersed and maintain camouflage discipline. Their bombs are ineffective against individual vehicles, and our flak batteries inflict prohibitive losses during their attack runs." Von Hauser's confidence reflected 3 years of mechanized warfare experience. Tanks were vulnerable to air attack only when bunched together on open roads. Spread out in covered positions, they were nearly impossible to hit with standard bombs. The Luftwaffe's own ground attack doctrine, shaped on the Eastern Front, reinforced this belief. But von Hauser's analysis, like that of every armored commander in Normandy, was about to become catastrophically outdated. June 15th, 1944, 15:20 hours. The first HVAR combat mission lifted off from Picaville with 8 P-47s from the 405th Fighter Group's 500th Squadron. Flight leader Captain Robert Strickland had already flown 47 combat missions over Europe. He had dropped bombs, strafed convoys, fought Luftwaffe interceptors, but this mission would be unlike anything he had flown before. Their target was a reported Panzer concentration near Pont-Hébert, about 15 miles southwest of Saint-Lô. Intelligence estimated at least a company of armor, 12 to 15 tanks, hidden in hedgerow-lined fields. Traditional bombing would have needed multiple passes with uncertain results. Strickland's orders were simple and absolute: single pass, fire all HVRs, egress immediately. At 15:47 hours, Strickland's formation spotted the target. Panzer Arfis sat in a classic defensive layout, each one hulled down behind earthen berms with camouflage netting stretched overhead. From ground level they were nearly invisible, but from 8,000 feet the sharp geometric outlines gave them away instantly. The attack profile was nothing like a traditional bombing run. Instead of a steep dive to 3,000 feet for bomb release, Strickland began his run at 6,000 feet with a shallow 30-degree angle. At 4,000 feet altitude and 1,200 yards out, he fired his first pair of HVARs. They lit up with white-hot exhaust, streaking forward and hitting supersonic speed in seconds. Their shaped charge warheads, built specifically for armor penetration, could pierce 60 millimeters of steel, more than enough to rip through the thin top armor of any German tank. In his hedgerow position, Feldwebel Hans Dietrich, commanding a Panzer IV of 2nd Company, heard a sound German tankers would never forget: the rising scream of UMO engines as P-47s dove toward their targets. Dietrich had exactly 4 seconds, the brief gap between hearing the roar and the rocket's arrival. There was nothing he could do. At close range, the rockets moved faster than sound. By the time he heard them, they were already there. The first HVAR slammed into his tank's engine deck at a 30-degree angle. Its shaped charge punched through the thin top plate and detonated inside the engine compartment. Diesel fuel ignited in an instant. 3 seconds later, the second rocket struck the turret ring, jamming the traverse mechanism. Dietrich and his crew bailed out just as ammunition began cooking off. In only 90 seconds, Strickland's 8 P-47s had launched 64 HVARs into the hedgerow defenses. After-action reports confirmed 7 tanks destroyed, 4 damaged, and 2 abandoned. American losses: 0 aircraft, 0 casualties. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story grips you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something especially powerful for you. The success of the June 15th strike sent shockwaves through Allied and German command structures alike. Within 48 hours, every P-47 group in the European theater received priority orders for HVAR installation. By June 20th, 1944, the 9th Air Force had 247 HVAR-equipped Thunderbolts flying over Normandy. The tactical implications were clear to both sides. General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, read the 405th Fighter Group's after-action report with intense interest. His forces were preparing for Operation Cobra, the long-awaited breakout from Normandy, and German armor remained the single greatest obstacle. Bradley's operations staff had calculated that conventional close air support would require 400 to 500 sorties to neutralize just one Panzer regiment. The HVAR changed that equation overnight. On June 22nd, Bradley's headquarters issued a revised air support doctrine. Fighter bombers would no longer conduct broad-area bombing of suspected armor positions. Instead, HVR-equipped P-47s would deliver precision strikes against confirmed tank locations. The updated doctrine emphasized single-pass attacks from medium altitude, maximizing pilot survival while unleashing overwhelming firepower on point targets. The German response was immediate and desperate. Panzer Group West, which commanded all armored forces in Normandy, issued Tactical Directive 27 on June 23, 1944. The Document, captured after the war and preserved in the National Archives, showed the Wehrmacht's realization that its most fundamental assumptions about armored warfare had collapsed overnight. The directive ordered immediate dispersal of all armor concentrations. No more than 2 tanks in any single position. No daylight movement unless absolutely unavoidable. All vehicles must remain under triple canopy concealment, trees, camouflage nets, and added vegetation. Most striking of all, the directive authorized company commanders to abandon defensive positions instantly upon hearing American aircraft engines, even before visual contact. This was unprecedented. For the first time in the war, Wehrmacht orders explicitly permitted retreat based solely on the sound of enemy aircraft, with no direct combat required. The psychological shock of the HVAR had become as powerful as its destructive force. Lieutenant Vader Huffman, a Panther commander in the 2nd Panzer Division, captured the effect on morale in his personal diary, June 24, 1944. We have become mice hiding from hawks. Yesterday we heard the Yabos, the fighter bombers, and abandoned our position at once. We drove our Panther 400 meters through hedgerows, damaging the suspension and exposing our movement to every American forward observer. When we returned 3 hours later, our old position was gone. 8 rocket strikes on an empty field. They would have killed us all in the 4 seconds between hearing them and impact. We are no longer fighting. We are simply trying to survive until the next hiding place. The tactical revolution spread far beyond isolated clashes. Allied intelligence teams, reviewing German radio traffic intercepted through ultra-decryption, discovered that Panzer commanders were now requesting permission to pull back from defensive sectors before American ground forces even arrived. The simple presence of P-47s overhead, sometimes without firing a single rocket, was enough to trigger withdrawals that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. Operation Cobra launched on July 25, 1944, with the most concentrated use of tactical air power in military history. Breaking out of Normandy required neutralizing the German armored reserves that had pinned Allied forces for 7 long weeks. HVAR-equipped P-47s would deliver the decisive blow in what became a catastrophic defeat for the Wehrmacht's Panzer forces. The operational plan, developed by 1st Army and 9th Air Force staff, called for coordinated strikes against every identified German armor position within 10 miles of the breakthrough zone. Intelligence had pinpointed elements of 5 Panzer divisions: Panzer Lehr, 2nd Panzer, 2nd SS Panzer, 116th Panzer, and 9th Panzer. Together, they fielded around 400 operational tanks, the largest German armored mass left in France. The weather on July 25th was marginal. Broken cloud cover at 4,000 feet with scattered rain showers. Under normal conditions, air operations would have been heavily restricted, but HVAR strikes didn't require the clear skies or precise dive angles that conventional bombing depended on. P-47 pilots could slip through gaps in the clouds, firing rockets from just 2,100 feet and still maintain lethal accuracy. The assault began at 8:09:38 hours. The first wave, 48 P-47s from the 405th and 406th Fighter Groups, hit Panzer Lehr positions near Saint-Gilles. Major Thomas Everett, flight leader, later described the strike in his combat report. We located enemy armor dispersed in wooded areas south of the coordinates. Individual tanks were spaced 100 to 150 yards apart under tree cover. We attacked in flights of 4, each aircraft firing 2 to 4 HVARs per pass. Hits were immediately visible: secondary explosions, fires, tanks trying to escape. We made single passes as briefed and egressed north. Total time over target, roughly 4 minutes. Observed results: 12 to 14 vehicles destroyed or damaged, no aircraft losses. Whatever its brief report could not convey was the chaos unfolding below. Hauptmann Josef Hartmann, operations officer for Panzer Regiment 130, survived the strike and later described it during post-war interrogations. His account offered a glimpse into the psychological collapse the HVAR inflicted. The sound came first, the awful screaming of many aircraft engines diving. Then we saw them. Dozens of thunderbolts bursting through the clouds. The rockets left white trails. There was no time to react, no hope of defense. Our flak batteries fired, but the American aircraft were too fast, too many. In 4 minutes, my regiment ceased to exist as a fighting force. Of the 42 tanks operational that morning, 27 were destroyed or abandoned. The remaining crews fled south without orders. Unit cohesion collapsed entirely. By 12:20 hours, 9 waves of P-47 strikes had hit German armored positions across a 15-mile front. 9th Air Force records documented 374 individual HVAR attacks against armor targets. The German losses were catastrophic, not only in vehicles destroyed, but in the complete fragmentation of command structure. The psychological damage went far deeper than the numbers suggested. Allied intelligence intercepts revealed German tank commanders repeatedly asking permission to abandon defensive sectors before American ground units even arrived. In several instances, entire companies withdrew purely because P-47s were reported operating in their area, without a single aircraft firing a rocket. The 2nd Panzer Division near Tessy-sur-Vire began retreating on the afternoon of July 25th despite having suffered no direct air attacks. The division's war diary, captured intact when its headquarters fell on July 28th, included the following entry. 14:30 hours, enemy fighter bombers conducting intensive operations throughout sector, anticipate overwhelming rocket attacks against division positions. Recommend immediate withdrawal to your secondary defensive line, current positions untenable against this form of attack. The recommendation was approved. The 2nd Panzer Division fell back 12 miles, abandoning fortified positions American infantry had not yet reached. The 4-second warning had become a weapon of its own, breaking German resistance before combat even began. By July 26th, the German defensive line in Normandy had collapsed. First Army forces advanced 15 miles in 24 hours, an unprecedented leap after 7 weeks of brutal, grinding attrition. What artillery and conventional bombing had failed to achieve, HVAR-armed P-47s accomplished in a single day. The revolution in air-to-ground warfare was complete. The effectiveness of the HVAR came from engineering principles German doctrine had never prepared for. Understanding why these rockets were so devastating requires looking at both the physics of shaped-charge warheads and the ballistic profile that made them almost impossible to evade. Traditional bombs fell in wide parabolic arcs dictated by gravity, release altitude, and aircraft speed. A pilot dropping a 500 LB bomb from 3,000 feet at 300 mph had to account for wind, angle, altitude, velocity, and potential target movement. The bomb remained in free fall for roughly 5 seconds, time in which a tank could move 50 to 75 feet. Precision depended on near-perfect conditions and extraordinary pilot skill. HVAR rockets removed all of these variables. The solid fuel motor drove the rocket to nearly 3,500 feet per second within the first 2 seconds of ignition. At typical engagement ranges of 800 to 1,200 yards, the projectile flew on an almost flat line with virtually no noticeable drop. From a 1,000-yard launch, time to impact averaged 2.6 seconds. Even at full speed, a tank could cover less than 20 feet in that interval. Far too little distance to escape the impact zone. The shaped charge design of the warhead represented an even more advanced breakthrough. Built on the principles of the Monroe effect, the explosive used a copper cone liner that, at detonation, collapsed into a hyperfast jet of semi-liquid metal traveling nearly 25,000 feet per second. This focused jet could punch through over 60 mm of armor plate, more than enough to defeat the top armor of every German tank in service, which generally ranged from 25 to 40 mm on engine decks and turret roofs. German tank engineers had built their machines to survive ground fire. The Panther's 120 mm sloped glacis could shrug off most Allied guns, but that advantage meant nothing when the threat came vertically from above. The thin upper armor meant to stop shrapnel, and small caliber rounds offered no resistance to a shaped charge jet that cut through steel as effortlessly as water slicing through paper. The tactical consequences were immediate. Wehrmacht doctrine for resisting air attack relied on dispersal, camouflage, and rapid movement. These methods offered some protection against traditional bombs, which needed exact release points and fell along predictable paths. Against HVAR rockets, none of these measures mattered. Oberst Colonel Ludwig Fischer, commander of the 9th Panzer Division's tank regiment, attempted to formulate countermeasures after his unit endured crippling rocket strikes in early August. His tactical report, written on August 7, 1944, and later seized during the Falaise encirclement, outlined the complete failure of defensive tactics. We have attempted every possible method of defense. Dispersal limits losses per strike, but does not prevent strikes. Concealment is meaningless once aircraft reach our sector. Pilots identify individual tanks from altitudes beyond our ability to detect them. Movement cannot save us. From the moment we hear engines, we have 4 seconds before rockets impact. In 4 seconds, a Panther at full throttle moves 40 meters. This is not enough to exit the target area. Our flak guns fire, but the Americans attack from speeds and distances that render effective defense unattainable. There is no tactical counter to this weapon. Fischer's conclusion left no room for doubt. We cannot mass armor for offensive action. We cannot hold prepared positions against a determined assault. The American rocket-armed fighter bombers have accomplished what their Sherman tanks never could. They have erased our armored superiority completely. The industrial imbalance only worsened Germany's tactical nightmare. By August 1944, the 9th Air Force operated 1,047 P-47 Thunderbolts, roughly 60% of which were equipped with HVARs. At any given time, American factories were producing 400,000 HVAR rockets in 1944 alone. German tank production, by comparison, peaked at just 1,169 vehicles per month across all types. Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer RVs combined. The arithmetic was brutal. American industry could replenish rockets faster than German factories could replace the tanks being destroyed. Each P-47 could carry 8 rockets. Each rocket could disable or destroy a tank. America could sustain hundreds of daily attack sorties. Germany was losing an industrial and technological war it could never hope to win. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 became the tomb for German armored strength in France. What remained of 7 Panzer divisions, roughly 200 operational tanks and assault guns, was trapped in a shrinking pocket southeast of Falaise. Allied forces had sealed 3 sides. The only possible escape ran east through a narrow corridor near Chambois. To reach it, German armor had to traverse open terrain in daylight under perfect visibility. HVAR technology had made this scenario a tactical death sentence. From August 18th to 21st, 1944, the dominance of air-launched rockets over armored formations would be made painfully clear. The weather was ideal for flying. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, calm winds. For German tank crews, it meant almost certain annihilation. Major Richard Keller, Operations. Officer for the 362nd Fighter Group, coordinated HVAR strikes from his forward air control post. His operational log, preserved in Air Force historical archives, details the systematic destruction. August 19th, 0745 hours, first strike, 16 P-47s engaged a tank column moving east from Troon. Targets clearly visible from 6,000 feet, tanks in column, on an open road. Multiple HVAR attacks conducted from Sudzien 48 to Saurin 2 hours. Results, 23 vehicles destroyed, 17 damaged or abandoned. No aircraft losses. AZ-08 30 hours, second strike. 12 P-47s attacked dispersed armor in fields south of Chambois. 96 HVARs fired at targets attempting to hide in the bocage. Results, 14 vehicles destroyed, 1 aircraft lightly damaged by ground fire. Pilot returned safely. The log continued, hour after hour, strike after strike. By the end of August 19th, the 362nd Fighter Group alone had flown 127 individual HVAR attack sorties. 9th Air Force records show that 17 fighter groups flew a total of 748 sorties into the Falaise Pocket in just a single day. The vast majority of P-47s carried HVRs. From the German perspective, the experience was apocalyptic. Oberleutnant, First Lieutenant, Hinrich Strauss, commanding a company of Panzer IVs from the 2nd Panzer Division, survived the Falaise Pocket and later provided detailed testimony during Allied interrogation. His account revealed the utter helplessness German crews felt. August 20th, 1944. That was the day I realized the war was lost. My company started the morning with 11 operational tanks. At 0600 hours, we received orders to move east toward Chambois. We knew the Americans controlled the skies, but we had no choice. The pocket was closing. We moved in dispersed formation, maintaining maximum spacing between vehicles. At 0640 hours, we heard them. Thunderbolts, perhaps 20 aircraft, coming from multiple directions, attacking in pairs. The rockets left smoke trails. We could see them approaching, but there was nothing we could do. Our machine guns fired uselessly at aircraft 1,000 meters away. The rockets struck with terrifying precision. One hit my tank's engine. We were disabled instantly. I ordered the crew to abandon ship. As we ran toward tree cover, I watched the remaining tanks of my company destroyed in minutes. 11 tanks eliminated in less than 10 minutes. We never even fired our main guns at enemy ground forces. We were annihilated from the air before we could engage. American after-action assessments from the Falaise pocket revealed staggering losses. Between August 18th and 21st, Allied fighter bombers destroyed or damaged approximately 344 German tanks and self-propelled guns within the pocket. HVAR-equipped P-47s accounted for an estimated 220 of these kills, 64% of the total. The remaining 36% were attributed to conventional bombs, napalm, and ground forces. Even more telling, German units abandoned hundreds of vehicles that had sustained only minor damage as crews refused to remain in positions systematically targeted by HVRs. The psychological defeat was total. Tanks that could have been repaired and returned to action were left burning because crews had lost the will to continue fighting under a weapon that gave them only 4 seconds to live. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, commanding Army Group B, sent his final report to Hitler on August 20th before committing suicide. Intercepted by Ultra and declassified in 1974, the message stated, "The enemy's air superiority, particularly his rocket-armed fighter bombers, has made armored operations impossible. Our tanks are destroyed before they can engage enemy ground forces. I can no longer maintain organized resistance in the face of weapons for which we have no defense." The 4-second warning had shattered the resolve of Germany's finest field commanders. The transformation of armored warfare in Europe was complete by September 1944. German panzer forces, which had once dominated battlefields from Poland to Moscow, were reduced to defensive units terrified of operating in daylight. The HVAR-equipped P-47 Thunderbolt had accomplished what years of ground combat could not: the total negation of German armored superiority. The statistics documented the revolution. From D-Day through the end of 1944, HVAR-armed fighter bombers destroyed or disabled an estimated 1,847 German tanks and self-propelled guns in the European theater. This accounted for roughly 65% of all German armor losses to air attack during that period, with the remaining 35% falling to conventional bombs, other rockets, and strafing runs. But the numbers told only part of the story. The psychological impact fundamentally altered German armored tactics. Wehrmacht doctrine in early 1944 had emphasized concentrated armor formations for breakthroughs and counterattacks. By autumn, German tanks operated in dispersed groups of 2 to 3 vehicles, moving only at night and refusing to concentrate even when the tactical situation demanded it. General Oberst Colonel General Hinz Guderius, Inspector General of Armored Troops, acknowledged the revolution in his post-war memoir. The American rocket-firing aircraft, particularly the P-47 Thunderbolt, rendered conventional armored operations impossible by mid-1944. Our tanks could defeat any Allied tank in direct combat, yet they never reached it. They were destroyed from the air before ground engagement occurred. The 4-second interval between hearing the attack and the rocket's impact became a phrase that haunted every tank commander. It was too short to react, too brief to evade, long enough only to understand that death was coming. The technological disparity had created a form of warfare that courage could not overcome. German tank crews were among the Wehrmacht's finest soldiers, veterans hardened across Europe and Russia. Yet skill, bravery, and determination counted for nothing against shape-charge warheads traveling 3,000 feet per second. From aircraft beyond the reach of any effective defense, the Americans had democratized tank destruction. Before HVARs, killing armor required specialized anti-tank units with specific training and equipment. After HVARs, any adequately trained fighter pilot could engage and destroy tanks with a high probability of success. This democratization transformed the battlefield entirely. The industrial capacity to produce 400,000 HVAR rockets in 1944 alone represented a level of military-industrial mobilization Germany could never match. Even if German engineers had developed equivalent weapons, which they attempted without success, German industry lacked the capacity to produce them in significant numbers while simultaneously manufacturing tanks, artillery, aircraft, and all other war material. The lessons learned from HVAR combat employment influenced military aviation for decades. The principle of delivering precision strike capability from beyond effective defensive range became fundamental to air-to-ground doctrine. Korean War fighter bombers carried direct descendants of the HVAR. Vietnam-era aircraft employed similar weapons. Modern precision-guided munitions are the technological evolution of the same concept. Destroy ground targets from standoff ranges using weapons too fast to evade. The P-47 Thunderbolt, equipped with 8 HVARs, had transformed from a fighter aircraft into flying artillery. Each plane carried firepower equivalent to a naval destroyer's broadside, deliverable with precision against individual targets. This transformation represented one of World War II's most significant tactical innovations, the achievement of precision strike capability from aerial platforms. For German panzer forces in 1944-45, the HVAR posed an unsolvable tactical problem. The 4-second warning from engine roar to impact was insufficient for any effective response. Tank commanders who had mastered the complexities of armored warfare found themselves helpless against a threat they could hear but could not defend against, see but could not evade. The streams of HVAR rockets that streaked across European skies in the war's final year carried more than high explosives. They carried the future of warfare, the realization that technological superiority, combined with industrial capacity, could render conventional military skill and courage obsolete. German tank crews who heard that 4-second warning understood they were experiencing not just tactical defeat, but the end of an era. An era when bravery and expertise could compensate for technological disadvantage. The revolution was complete. Industrial warfare had reached its full expression, and the 4-second warning had become the sound of inevitability, arriving at 3,700 feet per second.